to participate in this seminar on the likely impact of the KORUS FTA on the global automotive industry. Missing from the introduction is the fact that I'm relatively new to the UAW. As a matter of fact, 6 hours before I walked in the door the first day was when the Bush and Roe administrations announced that they had reached an agreement on the KORUS FTA. So I more or less received a baptism by fire. But as I was introduced, I've spent the last 25 years working in the labor movement, the majority of which have dealt with industrial, economic, and labor questions. If Dan was charged with shedding only light on the KORUS FTA and the global auto industry, I suspect that I've been tasked implicitly to shed the heat on the discussion. As a professional economist, I would hope that I will be able to, in my brief comments, shed both light and heat on that, but I won't shy away from the heat part of it either. Before responding directly to Professor Nam's paper, I want to refer to a speech to the Detroit Economic Club on Monday by Gary Shapiro, president of the Consumer Electronics Association, who argued that UAW opposition to the KORUS FTA was, and I quote, "contrary to the best course of action for America's economy and our future. What America hears is that Detroit needs special help and can't compete in the free market." Shapiro went on to challenge the big three automakers to, quote, "move quicker in integrating personal electronics technology into their vehicles," and claimed that the big three producers had somehow missed the iPod craze, leaving it to aftermath firms to meet the demand. Now, the UAW takes this type of criticism quite seriously, and I take it a bit personally as well, perhaps if for no other reason that I'm woefully inadequate in keeping up with my daughter's use of iPods, text messages, and knowledge of teenage pop music. But I think it's a bit of a stretch to argue that the big three's inefficiency at bringing the tunes of Hannah Montana to the new generation of American drivers as a contributing factor to the competitiveness or uncompetitiveness of U.S.-made vehicles vis-a-vis Korean-made cars and trucks is a bit of a stretch. But Mr. Shapiro does do us a favor by raising the economic concept of competitiveness, or in the words of Professor Nam, competitive advantage or competitive disadvantage. He also raises the important question, the important policy issue of whether measures to help the U.S. automotive industry should take place or not take place within the context of international trade agreements such as the KORUS FTA. This I found argument very similar to the one advanced by my co-partner in crime on the panel, Jeffrey Schott, who writes, "There is little that joint U.S. and Korean initiatives can do to improve the competitiveness of Ford, Chrysler, and GM in the U.S. market. The companies and unions will have to work together, though changes in U.S. policies could provide a more conducive environment for investment in new product development and worker retraining." We will leave aside, I think, for later the question about whether the unions and the companies in their negotiations last year did enough together to bring about changes in the competitiveness of the industry. But the UAW believes, by contrast, that there are things that Korea and the United States can jointly do, or perhaps more importantly, not do, to improve the competitiveness of the U.S. automotive sector. One thing would be to not approve the KORUS FTA in the form it was negotiated by the Bush and Roe administrations. Professor Nam is absolutely correct when he points out that, quote, the U.S. side argues that there exists unfair sentiment and regulations against imported automobiles in Korea. The UAW does not believe that the KORUS FTA adequately addresses the unfair structural competitive advantages enjoyed by Korean automotive producers. And I would like to focus a little bit on Professor Nam's use of the notion of competitive advantage. I think unlike the Consumer Electronics Association that I referred to a little bit earlier, that evaluates the trade deal in terms of whether it makes U.S. companies more competitive versus Korean firms, Professor Nam appears, in my reading, to prefer the use of the term in a purely nationalist context. In other words, would the KORUS FTA make one or both countries better off, and if so, by how much? In his exhaustive compilation of auto trade numbers, for example, only countries, not auto producers or classes, are identified as, quote, major players in the world market. The UAW, by contrast, analyzes the potential impact of the KORUS FTA on the auto sector from a different conception of competitiveness, from a conception of class. Are workers made better off relative to multinational auto companies under the FTA? And this is a slightly different question, or a slightly different question is whether the KORUS FTA would make American auto workers more or less competitive with auto workers in Korea, China, Europe, or elsewhere. By most measures of international productivity, I think this was alluded to in the first presentation this morning, U.S. workers can compete on the basis of labor productivity. Unfortunately, the auto provisions of the KORUS FTA are structured in a way that promotes wage competition rather than competition based on productivity and economic efficiency. Our question is also very different from Professor Nam's in the sense of we ask the question whether the United States and or American auto companies would be made better or worse off relative to Korea and Korea automakers. The belief of both the UAW and the Korean Metal Workers Union is that the FTA would make auto workers in both countries worse off. We have, the KMWU and the UAW have issued joint declarations opposing it and are undertaking an international mobilization effort to defeat not only the KORUS FTA, but the Canadian-Korea FTA, the Korea-European Union FTA, and generally the other FTAs that Korea is contemplating entering into. The question that I think we all ask ourselves, at least we do on our side, is, well, why would the Korean workers be opposed to the KORUS FTA? It goes back to one's conception of competitiveness or competitive advantage, and whether you view the world as whether the free trade agreement strengthens workers' ability to organize and bargain collectively vis-a-vis the corporations, or whether it improves that. Not whether is this better or worse for Korea or better or worse for the United States. Mr. Shapiro can stand in Detroit and criticize the UAW and argue that the KORUS would be great for the 2,000 electronic companies he represents, while he ignores that these very same companies have laid off thousands and thousands of workers in the United States over the last